Hi everybody, welcome to my presentation. So as Michelle just said, I'm Steph and I am the founder and CEO of Beyond Bea Charity, and I'm going to just introduce you to a little bit more of a perspective of baby loss. So obviously it's really important that we're making sure that families feel supported when the baby's died, and through that there's lots of things that we're able to do. Obviously baby loss can be defined in quite a lot of ways, and specifically I'm going to focus a bit more at the moment on miscarriage, medical termination, or also known as termination for medical reason, amongst other names, stillbirth and neonatal death, which are more so in the remit of maternity and midwifery. So some of you may have some existing understanding of baby loss, and some of you may not. And regardless of what your experiences are already, it doesn't always mean that you can quantify exactly how often this happens. And for a lot of us, obviously we see what's going on in our own hospitals. You might see what's going on in your own placement areas or just kind of your local area. But sometimes to kind of fathom just how often this is happening is quite difficult to kind of consider. And in the UK, our age of viability is 24 weeks gestation, which means that we don't necessarily quantify those babies that die below 24 weeks gestation, because in terms of the eyes of the law, for a baby that's already died, it's not legally recognised, which means that the quantifiable data isn't necessarily there. So it means that for those families, we can't necessarily define that exactly. In 2019, given that the data that we've got to reflect all of this information at the moment, 3,183 babies died due to termination for medical reason, and very specifically due to a fetal abnormality. So that baby had an abnormality for some reason, and so obviously quite a high number there. 2,399 babies were stillborn, and 1,158 babies died in the neonatal period. There's also so many families, as I just mentioned, and babies that don't necessarily get to count within those statistics. So there's all those babies that died below 24 weeks gestation in any capacity, and there's also a lot of babies there that died as a result of a termination for a medical reason, but not necessarily because of a fetal abnormality. So there's a lot of babies that we're not necessarily recognising, and I think just looking at those numbers alone to even imagine what that looks like as an image is quite a lot of babies. That information is taken from the latest Embrace and Department of Health reports based on the babies that have died, and as I said, it's something that we just don't have access to for babies below 24 weeks that have died as a result of things like miscarriage, because we just don't quantify it in the UK. So a couple of things that I really want you to remember is that we have a role in bereavement care, and it's not necessarily that you can take their pain away, because you're never ever going to be able to do that. We can't make everything better, we can't make anything go away, but one of the roles that you have is the possibility to make this whole process easier to understand and digest. And by doing that and trying to do some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today, amongst other things, it's one of those things you can try and do just to make the process just that little bit better. You're not going to make it magically better, you're not going to suddenly make everything okay, but it's just going to make it so that you're not adding barriers, because you have the capacity to either add barriers or take those barriers away. And you can be the person who really makes or breaks this kind of experience for them. And obviously we don't want to make it any worse than it already is. So if you've got the capacity to just make that a little bit easier by removing those barriers, then we want to try and do that. And I'm going to show you some of the ways that I think that that can be done. One of the biggest things is enabling choice. And we want to make sure that families are offered those choices. It's never ever our place to remove those choices from a family, and if anything, you want to be able to make sure that they're offered every single choice and possibility, and then they choose what they don't want. We shouldn't pick what we think they might want, or what they might say no to, or what they might say yes to, because quite frankly you don't know, and that person might just surprise you a little bit. One of the things that we've done to try and enable that choice a little bit more is we launched a resource called the Alternative Birth Bag. The Alternative Birth Bag started as a resource that we wanted to launch initially with a different name, and this kind of was our draft name to begin with, and it got out there a bit more and more, and then it turned out that actually a lot of people quite liked the name, and so we stuck with it. So the Alternative Birth Bag is a free resource that we produced, and a lot of this came off the back of personal experiences, professional experiences, input from a range of different families, a range of different professionals, and people who'd had that experience themselves. Because what we found was anyone experiencing medical termination, late miscarriage, or stillbirth often have this kind of period of time that we call the void. And for a lot of them, they'll have things like an induction. So they might go home, and usually that time period will be 24 to 48 hours. And then they come back into hospital and then continue with the remainder of that induction. And for most hospitals, that's pretty much the policy of how things go. There might be a few people that will have a different kind of structure, but for the majority, that tends to be the case. And in that time, they have no idea what is going to happen, what's going to happen next. What do you pack? What do you pack when your baby's died? Do you still need a nappy? What do you pack for your birth partner? What am I going to need? Is there things I should pull out of the bag if I've already prepped it? So this resource is something that we created to answer those questions, because we wanted families to have that informed choice. So say if somebody goes into hospital tomorrow and their baby has died, do they know what a cuddle cot is? Of course they don't know what a cuddle cot is. Why should you know what a cuddle cot is? But actually, if they've read this resource and they've been told that this exists, then actually they could say, oh, so we heard there's this thing called a cuddle cot. Could we have one of those? And it just gives people a bit of information. So it's quite a simplistic resource because it's 6 pages. They're all double-sided. It's not filled with lots and lots of information in that it's full of loads of content, but it's quite simple. It's simply explained in a gentle way. But it also gives signposting to one standardized website that is just specific to this resource. They can go to that website. They can then read as much information further that as they want to, that will give them more information about something that they didn't know about. So they might choose to just read the resource, or they might choose to go and read the website as well. And then within there, we've added things like, what do they want to pack for the birth partner? Are there things they'd like to pack for their baby? Are there things they might want to research before they go in? And we've also talked about a birth plan. So regardless of gestation, there are aspects of things that people can do as part of a birth plan. And it might not seem like the typical thing to do when a baby's died, but they still need to have their baby, whether that's in theatre, whether that is in a room. Wherever that is, there's still things that we can facilitate and give them choices of. So how can we best do that? At the moment, as it says there, it's currently available at 54 trusts across the UK. It's completely free of charge, and you can sign up your hospital, and you can also nominate your hospital to have it. So even if you don't work in a hospital, you can nominate your hospital to receive it, and we can inform the trust that that's been advised by somebody. So you can head to our website, go to the resources area, click on the Alternative Birth Bag, and all your information is there for you. And it's currently available for those that have had late miscarriage, stillbirth, and medical termination. The content at the moment is around 16 weeks onwards, and we're working on something for those that have experienced loss below 16 weeks. And we're hoping that we'll release something at a later point that's specifically more so for things like neonatal death. But we're just kind of trialing things at the moment. One of the other things that you're able to facilitate as part of that kind of choice is enabling people to have time. And one of the things that you can do that is use things like a cuddle cot. Using a cuddle cot enables a family to keep the baby cool. And by keeping the baby cool, you're going to enable that baby to have less deterioration, and it reduces that time scale really. So I often don't say deterioration to a family. Obviously, it's a clinical explanation as to what is happening, but to that family, deterioration is not the thing that's happening. Their baby's not getting worse, their baby is changing. So I often use the word changes, because that's what is happening. There are some changes that are happening, and we can explain those to a family, how they are normal, but there are some things we can do to support those changes to not happen as quickly. So how can we do that? So one of the things we can do is help keep your baby cool, and the cuddle cot facilitates that to happen in a capacity that works with that room or wherever they are, so they can then have the opportunity to make more memories, because they'll have more opportunity to have time with their baby if that's something that they do want. So as you can see from this photo, it facilitates other opportunities, like things like taking the baby home. So a family might choose to take the baby home, and you saw it previously set up in a Moses basket, but sometimes a family might want their baby between them and their bed, but they want to keep the baby cool. So the pipe can just be adjusted so it's on the bed. You can put it in the parent's arms. So if they don't want to let go of their baby and they want to cuddle their baby for a bit, they could put it in their arms. So you can just facilitate it around that family, just like you would your normal family life. Things adjust and change, and we need to be able to adapt with that of what they want, rather than their baby is a separate object that is placed in a cot and doesn't leave that cot. That actually gives them that freedom, and it enables maybe potentially other members of the family to meet the baby. So especially at the moment through COVID, a lot of things like visiting's been so restricted, and I have definitely seen more families go to take their babies home because of that, because they want siblings to meet the baby, or they want friends or family to have met the baby. And at the moment, it's not just been able to be facilitated. So what can we do to do that? And that's one way you can do it. And it just enables them to be able to place baby anywhere, as I said before, but also even in like their own cot. So sometimes if somebody's taken the baby home, they might want to use that next to me cot that they've got for the last night, or they might want to use the cot for one time, and that'll be the only time they'll ever get to do that. But it's an opportunity that we can give to do that. And it might not seem like a normal process that you've offered before. It might seem quite daunting, but actually it's really not. And we should be able to facilitate that for a family. And if you're ever in doubt, don't deny someone the choice. Offer the choice, but make sure that then you can be informed about how to do it, or say, I'm really sorry, I'm not 100% sure of the process at the moment, but I'm going to go and chat with my colleague and double check this. But it doesn't mean you should remove that choice just because you don't know how to do something. One of the other things that we can also do is support people with memory making, and memory making can range quite considerably in terms of the things that we can offer, but it can include things like photographs, being in a comfortable environment. So hopefully now more and more hospitals have bereavement suites, but quite a lot of them still don't, or they do, but it's basically a room with a plaque on it that's exactly the same as any other room. So even just making it more comfortable, offering an extra bed in there if there is only a hospital bed, so that someone can stay with them, making sure there's a comfortable area if they got their access to their own kettle, or is there a fridge in there, things like that, that just make somewhere a bit more comfortable so that they can just access some milk if they need it. Those kinds of things that just make it a little bit homelier, so that they don't feel like they're having to press a call bell every time they want a sip of water. Things like inkless print, so you're able to facilitate them being able to have a copy of exactly like the baby's hands and feet, and things like that can enable further memories, because they can be made into things like stamps, which is something that we can make, and there's also companies that can make things like jewelry, which have a replica of those prints on them, and they only need a photograph using to do that, so they don't have to part with those prints, because obviously they don't want them to leave them. Clay imprint, a cutting of hair, 3D casts is something that's becoming increasingly more popular now, and it's something that in bereavement is much more accessible to people, because there are some charities now that will help facilitate that. An example of that is a charity called Judas Cloud. They offer a free 3D casting service across the UK for bereaved families that hospitals can work with, to make sure families have that facilitation of that. But it's something that it doesn't add much to your role, and they will support you to do the bit that takes the time, and you just simply need to know something that's almost equivalent of the time it takes to do some clay prints. Memory boxes, so many of you will be aware of memory boxes already, and if you're not, then there's a charity called For Lewis, which is the number 4 LOUIS, and For Lewis offer free memory boxes across the UK, and there are pockets of other charities that also supply them, but they are there, they're free, and every family should be offered them regardless of the type of loss or when the loss is, because for a lot of families it's one of the only tangible things that they will ever have of their baby. So this is the opportunity that we can give families to have that. Size appropriate teddies is something that's not going to absolutely dominate that baby, something that they can cuddle or hold or be with. And appropriate clothing, so something that is going to be right for that baby, fits that baby. It isn't really difficult to get that baby into the outfit, because nobody needs to see someone struggle putting the baby into clothes, so making sure it's appropriate. So in terms of how we can facilitate a lot of this, there's not really a lot of things that we need to do that. But one of the biggest things is having someone who's going to lead kind of this bereavement service in some way, or even just have a specialist interest, someone who has a responsibility for that role. Obviously, we've known from so many other reports that it's really important that someone does have a responsibility. There should be, in a lot of cases, a lead midwife, a bereavement midwife who has that role and be responsible for it. Because then they can signpost to things, they can help people, and they're aware of what needs to be disseminated, then they're aware of what's going on, they're aware of updates that are coming in, they're aware of new resources, and they can stay on top of that. But it's also really important to remember that that lead doesn't mean that they just take over. It's not like they're in that day, they take over. Their duty is to make sure they support the staff, so they can then disseminate, so that staff feel comfortable. They have a student, or if they have someone who's doing a preceptorship, they can then disseminate that information, and that's how it should work. It isn't that they're there to take over. It's everybody's responsibility to be able to deliver bereavement care. There's just someone who specialises in it. Just in the same way, there's people who work in governance, but it doesn't mean they're going to do all your documentation for you. So it's just thinking of it like that. They're a lead in that role, but they're not there to take over. We still all have a responsibility, just in the same way that an obstetrician doesn't just come in and take over every delivery just because they specialise in obstetrics. And one of the other biggest things is obviously something we're really, really encouraging, because this is basically the foundation of everything we do at Beyond Bea. So education, and one of the biggest things, access and training. Obviously at the moment, in terms of training, it is something that is definitely being booted off the agenda. It has been for such a number of years. It's not necessarily something that is always out there, and it's been a challenge for a long time. At universities, people aren't necessarily being offered opportunities to get the training whilst they're there. You're then not necessarily always getting it as part of your routine training, and also people are struggling to even be freed up for training. So even if you could just add in simple things like a regular video that gets circulated now and again, and I'll show you some resources you can use to do that. But also bearing in mind that obviously you have a duty in your role, and especially once qualified, to make sure that you're doing your CPD, your continued professional development. So even just one of the things that you can do can be accessing that training independently, and especially when it feels quite important that this is done right, because stepping away from a family thinking, I know I didn't do that as well as I could have done, sometimes is enough to make you think, I need to do something about this. And making sure you're driven by that. Obviously, sometimes, yes, I understand not being paid for it isn't always the greatest, but sometimes I think not feeling satisfied by the care you providing can be enough, hopefully, to make you feel like you actually want to step away and do it a little bit better. And there are additional resources as well that you can use for part of your education and your continued professional development. And also one of the really simple things is like location of stock and your memory making items. So as part of like the alternative birth bag, for example, one of the things that we did from working in a hospital environment, I'm always aware new things come in, no one has any idea it exists or where it is, and that's not useful. So we developed a poster. It says, this is here, this is what it's for, this is where it's located, or who to contact if you run out. Simple, but it makes sense, but it just, you know where it is then. And another thing that Cuddlecot have launched is making sure there's a simple poster. It tells you where the Cuddlecot is, so everybody knows. So as new staff start and they've not had chance to be shown where it is, they can locate it. And people should be aware of that. That should be part of your tour. Your fire extinguisher, your Cuddlecot, they're vital pieces of equipment. They're just for very different things. So making sure where people know where they are, or where they can get extra things, or if something's missing in a memory box, is there a way I can get hold of that? So just making sure people are aware of where those things are. Some of the things that we are able to offer to make sure that you can facilitate all this is we do a range of different sessions, and something that's really important to us is that everything that we do is always accessible. Wherever possible, we've always made things free, and where we can't make things free, we'll always make it as accessible as we can. So one of the things that we do have is the comprehensive sessions, which are listed on the left hand side there. So they're for any student who's currently studying at university, who's studying a healthcare course, as well as a health professional. And you're able to access those are the 2.5-hour sessions, and they'll run through a series of different things that are going to be useful for your kind of development in your roles, and sometimes just to refresh things. Bespoke sessions are designed for people at a university group, or a group of attendees at a hospital or hospice, and they are so that we can make a bespoke session that is specific to the needs of that individual group. So we can make it specific for a group of student midwives, or we can make it specific for a group of gynae nurses, or we can make it specific for a range of staff in one trust. So we'll make it specific for the needs of what is right for you. Face-to-face is something that we very much want to return to. Today is our first event back face-to-face, and I appreciate some of you aren't here face-to-face, but it is something that we're very much wanting to return back to. And for those that were familiar with us before COVID, we pride ourselves on the way our interactive sessions worked. We are very hands-on. We're not very good at keeping bums in seats, because nobody likes training where you're sat here all day and you don't want to just hear the same voice again and again. So it's something that we pride ourselves on in the way we work, and we want to keep it interactive and to have stuff that actually clinically is going to be valuable. And another thing that we do, we put a baby loss conference on every year, which is held on in December. We've got loads of videos you can access as well from previous conferences, and we've also got a conference happening on the 19th of March this year, and it happens every year, which is a collaborative conference. So it's not just focused on baby loss, but maternity, birth and neonatal sectors. So as a simple thing, that's one of the things you can access in your own time, or even if you want a bespoke one within your trust or university. And then one of the other things that we're able to do is then give people the opportunity to have accessible resources. So we want to make sure that people can go on to do things, and sometimes you get 10 minutes. Sometimes it might be that you're waiting to go and collect someone from the ward and the bed's not quite ready and you've got 10 minutes. Sometimes it might be that you're at home and you've not got much to do that day. And sometimes you just think, I've got a family in that room and I'm just struggling. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. So on the resources area of our website, we've got the memory making videos. Every single one of those videos covers a different area. So we've got the setting up of a Cuddlecot, and all of these have been done in a way that it's not just being done in like a room like where I am now, where we're just going to set this up and that's easy, because quite frankly, if I got you to just set it up in a normal room with no one around, yeah, it is very easy, but it's not really easy to do in front of the family. So we've made them act like a bereavement situation. You have the family there with you. How do you do that? How do you communicate what's going on? How do you explain what all these noises are that are coming from this machine, and how is that going to make them feel? How can you communicate and answer questions that they might have? So we've tried to make sure that that is kind of reflected in those videos. So as well as the Cuddlecot one, we've also got a video on doing inkless prints, some of the things to bear in mind, and some of the things like make sure you take a photo of them, because leaving them exposed to sun will make them fade, something that not everybody knows. And if a family go and put them in a photo frame and not realize that, their prints will disappear forever. And it's not something that everyone will pick up on. So these are important things to bear in mind. Also making sure that you're aware of how to use different clay kits. There's a couple of different types of clay, as well as further information and videos that we're developing. And we're always interested to hear from what people need. So if you ever think this is a situation I've been involved in, or this is something I could learn from, we'll work with it and we'll try and make sure those resources are available and develop them as time goes on. So as part of the videos that we've created, you can see a very slight screenshot here of one of them, but what I'm going to do is just give you a small clip of what to expect when you watch one. This is just a couple of minutes of a clip, as we're just about to talk about the cuddle cot, and it just gives you an idea of what to expect when you do see them so that you can access them, but also they're done in a realistic manner. So I'm just going to play this.
So I know you might have noticed that some changes have started to happen, especially with the lips and fingernails, and those are really normal changes. But we have something called a cuddle cot, and that can start to help reduce those changes. It will make her a little bit cooler, but it means that you'll get to spend a bit more time with her. Would you like me to set one of those up for you, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go and get that for you in the back scene. Okay.
Thank you, Steph.
The cuddle cot should be supplied in a cuddle cot blue box. You will need to get out an appropriate size mat for the Moses basket or cot that you are using.
So obviously that is just a very quick kind of snippet of one, but it just gives you an idea of how they're laid out. They're quite realistic, but it also kind of gives you that clinical perspective. How would I act? How would I talk to them? What questions might arise? And we've done that for a range of different settings so that it's not just completely new when you're in that environment. You can kind of think how you can use them. You can use them for reflective pieces if maybe you want something to be able to kind of look at. You can use them as a point to kind of learn from. You might see things in that video that you think, oh, I don't even know what that is, or I've not seen that before. You might then go and do some research off the back of it. So you can use those videos in a way that are going to work best for you, and just utilize them in kind of any capacity that feels right. So that's the end of my presentation, and if you do want anything at all from us, you can visit our website. As I mentioned, we've got lots of resources. We've got online sessions available, and as I said, they should return to face-to-face hopefully soon. We've got a range of social media as well. We've got lots of resources within the social media as well as things like Instagram lives. We've got about 30 hours worth of content on different topics in there, and we try and add any updates that we do have, as well as various resources within our online shop to support you with learning, like memory making practice kits, as well as other resources to help you in your role. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope it's been useful.